Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the New Economy Network Australia's NENA Narratives Week. We're really pleased to have you join us today for our first session in a week-long festival, if you will, exploring the power of stories and narratives in our life, in our society, and in particular, in our economy. My name is Dr. Michelle Maloney. I'm one of the co-founders and directors of the New Economy Network Australia. And I'm very pleased to host today the beginning of our discussion about what narratives are, why they're important, and how we can all play a role in being storytellers in our communities and in our world. I'm going to share screen so that we can kick things off and have a look at the program of exciting things that we're doing this week. Please hold while I get the right button. There we go. So welcome to NENA Narratives Week. As I mentioned, the New Economy Network Australia, in partnership with all of our wonderful speakers this week, and also WEALL Australia, Wellbeing Economy Alliance Australian Hub, very excited about what we're going to get up to. I'm going to actually go to our website to show you a little bit about who NENA is and what our NENA Narratives Week is all about. For those of you who might be new to NENA, the first thing we always do in our meetings is acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the traditional lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples here in beautiful North Brisbane. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and the remarkable civilizational culture and governance system that has cared for country and cared for each other since time immemorial. In the work that I do personally and in my work life with both NENA and the Australian Earth Laws Alliance and Future Dreaming, I work in deep friendship, solidarity and partnership with many Indigenous friends and colleagues. And NENA was founded on one of our core principles is solidarity with First Nations peoples in Australia. And shortly when I tell you a little bit more about NENA, you'll learn more about that. But before we really get into the discussions today, as part of acknowledging country, acknowledging that always was, always will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's country, feel free to write in the chat whose land you're on and where you are, and just say hello. It's always nice for folks to be running through those chat comments and see where everybody is scattered around this beautiful, remarkable continent. But to NENA Narratives Week, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it and then tell you a little bit about NENA and our broader mission. And then we're going to get right into the discussions about all of our stories and what role they play in the economy. So firstly, this might have been the graphic that brought you to us. We framed this week about how stories can change our world and change our economy. And NENA Narratives Week has got one event every day this week, which I'll run you through in a moment. If you're not familiar with the program, please do visit our website. I'll put the link in the chat in a moment. But you'll see that we have got our session today about what are narratives and why are they important, and how do we start thinking about stories and the role they play in our society. On Tuesday, we're looking at how we communicate an inspiring, succinct, memorable vision for the future of Australian society. We've got some excellent speakers, including our wonderful Chris Riedy, my partner in crime in the NENA Narratives Hub, Alana Siegfried, Caress Cranwell, and Sophia Van Ruth. On Wednesday, again, a lunchtime session, how do we tell compelling, coherent stories about the innovations that can take us into an imagined future? We're delighted to be joined by Alana Glenn from Common Cause. And Chris and I have decided that we will be having a NENA Gruen transfer, or a Nguyen transfer. We're actually going to be showing a couple of videos and really picking apart narratives in the old and the new economy. We'll be having a bit of fun with it, and we'll also be having some practical ways that our participants online can be part of all the fun. So that's our discussion on Wednesday. And on Thursday, it's an evening session. I just really want to stress that. I don't want folks rolling up at 12 noon and being sad because there's no one online to talk to. We've got an excellent session on Thursday evening. It's a warm data session, which is hosted by Joanna, Fiona, and other folks in the warm data community. Not to be missed, really excellent stuff. Then last but not least, on Friday the 22nd, again, back in a lunchtime session, we've got the digital storytellers folks that are going to talk to us about the tools and approaches that communities can use to start activating and sharing digital stories. So it's all free, all week, all for you. Can't wait. It's going to be fantastic. And for those who are new to the New Economy Network Australia, please do visit our website. You'll find out a little bit about us. We run courses. We primarily function as a wonderful network of amazing people, hundreds and hundreds of official members inside our cooperative, and thousands of people connected through mailing lists, social media, and annual conferences. We have geographic hubs, meaning folks who are working in place-based ways across different kinds of sectors. And we have lots of different people working across sectors, sharing information and ideas about how we can shift our economy from being this dominant paradigm around growth at all costs and social injustice to making sure that the economy serves people as people serve each other and the planet. So there's lots of information about NENA online, but I didn't want to take up too much time talking about all of those nuts and bolts. What I did want to do was really just introduce why stories and the Narratives Hub itself came to be inside NENA, and then I'll introduce our speakers. So the New Economy Network Australia was formed and has evolved since 2016, when Bronwyn Morgan and myself held a conference in Sydney. It was originally looking at social enterprises, but what we wanted to do was open up a space for folks around Australia to connect, to literally just have conversations about the economy, but also start to forge new ways of networking, connecting, and showcasing the very different forms of economic thinking and doing that already exist and that are continuing to bubble up around Australia. And from the very early days, one of the biggest issues that we really have to change is the way people think about what the economy is, its alleged purpose in a society. And really, I often like to say the last thing a fish will notice is water. Sometimes the last thing that ordinary humans notice are the deeper messaging and stories inside their culture. If you're raised in a community that talks about jobs and growth, jobs and growth, jobs and growth, if your news every night talks about the stock market and jobs and growth and jobs and growth, then you're going to start to have communities and people actually thinking that all of those ideas are very real. If, for example, you grow up in a different community, and when I hear Mary Graham, a remarkable Indigenous elder and woman from the Kombu Mary peoples, when she talks about how folks are raised in her community, where they're taught that it's about caring for country, caring for each other, having an obligation, constantly practicing as often as possible all of the good deeds to care for each other and to care for country, you start to have this sort of socially reinforced norms and stories and ideas that build and rebuild how we live in a society. So what we're deeply fascinated by is if NENA really wants to play some kind of part in helping folks shift the way we think and do economics, and really push economics back as a place that's meant to be a collection of tools to help us live our lives. And in particular, how do we challenge things that folks like myself feel are deeply dangerous? The growth paradigm, endless material extractivism, a focus on money at all costs, where social justice initiatives are seen as some kind of annoyance to those in power. If we're really serious about playing our contribution or playing our role in this space, how do we shift the stories we tell each other about who we are, how we fit into the world, and what the economy should be doing? So that is pretty much it from me. I just wanted to introduce to you that NENA, the New Economy Network Australia, is always keen to bring people in to our network to share with each other. We have a distributed governance model where all our hubs pretty much are autonomous and do their own thing, but they're interconnected and they bring their knowledge, wisdom, ideas into the bigger network. And that's what the NENA Narratives Hub is all about, a hub of people interested in the role of stories and narratives in shifting and supporting a more compassionate earth-friendly society. The NENA Narratives Hub is just one of many dozens of groups connected in and out of NENA. We've got NENA Housing Week in November, where something like 30 to 40 organisations around Australia will be sharing their updates on housing issues, right through from the problems with property and capitalism to co-housing and how we share different ways in different places. We've got a whole bunch of things going on, but this week I can't wait to listen and learn and hopefully come out the other end with a few more tips and ideas about how I can be a more effective storyteller and how we can all share together to start pushing further at the deep cultural things we need to change in mainstream society. So without anything further from me, I'd now like to introduce, we have two wonderful human beings here with me live today. We've got Chris Riedy and Alana Marsh. I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you in a moment in the proper way. And for me, the proper way is however they feel, whichever hat they're wearing today, whichever is appropriate for this session. We'll also be showing a short video from the always wonderful Katherine Trebeck, one of the co-founders of WEALL International, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance International. So what I might do is just let Chris introduce himself quickly, and then Alana introduce herself, and then we'll hand over to Chris to share some thoughts with us, if that's okay. So Chris, did you want to say hello?
Hello, welcome to NENA Narratives Week. So I am Chris Riedy. I'm Professor of Sustainability Transformations at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS, University of Technology, Sydney. That takes a while to say. I'm also co-conspirator with Michelle in the NENA Narratives Hub, and that's the much more relevant role for today. But I mentioned my academic role because a lot of the work I do is around shifting narratives around sustainability. And over the couple of decades now I've been working in that space, I've come to realize the power that narrative has to both open up possibilities and opportunities, but also as a barrier to the kind of futures that we're trying to bring about: sustainable futures, regenerative futures, well-being economies, all of those kind of things. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm on Darawal country in Thirroul, down towards Wollongong in New South Wales, and looking forward to speaking more shortly.
Thanks, Chris. I'd like to thank you and Michelle for inviting me to be a part of today. NENA's Narrative Week sounds amazing. I'm going to have to check the program out and come to some of the other events, I think. I'm a Miriam woman, so my maternal grandparents left the Torres Strait in the 1950s, and I'm on Wurundjeri land at the moment down in Melbourne. I've been down here for about 17 years. And yeah, excited to spend some time with you today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Right, so I'm going to unpin Alana and we shall emerge shortly again when it's our turn. But Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm just going to share screen because I've got some slides. All right, so NENA Narratives Week. We're on day one, and each of the days there's kind of a guiding couple of questions that have been the way that we've sort of tried to construct the days, and they have a bit of a storytelling theme to them. So today is really, firstly, why do narratives matter, a little bit about what we mean by narratives and why we think it's really important for NENA's work. Whoops. But also this question of, it's sort of easy for us to critique aspects of the neoliberal capitalist dominant narrative. And what we want to think about is, how do we actually tell a compelling story about our present society and economy that creates dialogue rather than just criticizing and saying what's wrong. So we want to think about, what is it that we want to carry forward from current narratives and current ways of doing things? or how can we transform those concepts so that they are going to work better in a well-being economy? So that's one of the things we'll think about a little bit today. Michelle's done a great job of acknowledging country, but I just want to add my acknowledgement. As I said before, I'm on Darawal land in New South Wales, and I want to acknowledge the elders past and present from Darawal people, and of course all the Indigenous nations that whose land we find ourselves on today. And I'm personally so inspired by Indigenous stories that have developed and evolved in interaction with this land over so many tens of thousands of years. So there's so much to learn about storytelling from Indigenous culture, and I'm really thrilled to hear from Alana shortly. So what do we mean by narratives? It's kind of a term that can mean many different things to different people, and so that makes it a little bit confusing. What is it that we're talking about? You might have something quite different in your head when I say that word narrative to what's in my head. And also, why do these matter for NENA's work? Why do we feel it's so important that we would have a whole week talking about narratives? So Alana Siegfried, who is going to be one of our guest speakers tomorrow, has written a wonderful book called A Future Untold. And I love this quote from her book, and I hope I'm not stealing it from her presentation tomorrow, but she said that narratives are a system or collection of related stories that are inherently felt or understood to be true. That doesn't mean that they actually line up with what science might say or what we might call facts, but they feel true, they're understood as true. And at the root of cultural change is changing the wide-reaching narratives that underpin our understanding of the way things are. So when Michelle was talking about jobs and growth, jobs and growth, jobs and growth before, that's become such a deep part of our cultural narrative that for most people, it is part of the water that we swim in. It's not something that we think about and say, well, why are we so focused on growth? Why has that become so central? And why is it growth in GDP that we're so fixated on? So if we want to achieve the really substantial cultural change that shifting to a well-being economy will be, then we need to be thinking about those deep stories, those narratives that both stand in our way, but also how we can help make those narratives support us in the kind of shifts that we're trying to make. So Michelle and I have both talked about this idea already, but I was just reading Jeremy Lent's book, The Web of Meaning, and this quote struck me quite early on, and he's talking about worldviews, but worldviews, narratives are a big part of worldviews. So he said that like fish that don't realize they're swimming in water because it's all they know, we tend to assume that our worldview simply describes the world the way it is, rather than recognizing it's a constructed lens that shapes our thoughts and ideas into certain preconditioned patterns. So we don't see that lens, we don't see that worldview, we don't see those narratives that we've been born into unless we really make an effort to do that, and we reflect and try and draw out those lenses that have been constructed. And of course, the fact that they are constructed means that we can construct things differently. We have some agency over this. But we're immersed in this narrative landscape all the time. We're being bombarded with advertising, with news reports, with social media that reinforces one narrative or another. And the net effect of all that, there's different narratives contesting with each other, but some narratives have become quite dominant in shaping our behaviour and particularly our economic activity. So a couple of things there from George's, what he had to say there about stories, and I do recommend that entire TED talk. It's fantastic. But one of the things we can often tend to do when we're arguing for new economic ideas is talk about facts and what the science might say, and not think about the narratives that we're trying to progress as well. And as George Monbiot was pointing out there, it's much more about trying to find a story that appeals to people than trying to find a set of facts or to argue against the ideas that exist in neoliberalism. So in that talk, he goes on to talk about how there's a basic neoliberal capitalist narrative that has followed on from previous economic narratives in having a really specific kind of structure to it that is the kind of stories that humans have been telling ever since we had language. And so that's really powerful. We've come to know the world through story, and we expect stories to go in a particular way. And he argues that the reason that we've found it so difficult to overturn the neoliberal capitalist narrative, despite things like the global financial crisis and so on that have put it under threat, is that we haven't yet found as compelling a narrative to replace it with. We haven't found a way to tell a story that can do the same work for people as the neoliberal capitalist narrative is doing. So the text up the top there is the way that he has structured the story of neoliberal capitalism. And he starts all of the narratives that he talks about in the talk with this disorder afflicts the land. So there's this state where things are not good, and there's a cause of that. And in this case, he argues, caused by the powerful and nefarious forces of the overmighty state, whose collectivizing tendencies crush freedom and individualism and opportunity. But the hero of the story, and there's always a hero in these stories, is the entrepreneur who's going to fight those powerful forces, roll back the state, and through creating wealth and opportunity, restore harmony to the land. So this sort of very simple structure for a story is very common, and this is the story that neoliberal capitalism is telling. Government has got too big, needs to get out of the way, let the entrepreneur and the market do the things that they can do well. And he's then trying to make the case for a new kind of story, and we won't get so much into that today, but that's where I hope we'll go through the rest of the week, is thinking about, well, what sort of stories could replace that? But some of the elements of the neoliberal capitalist narrative from my own work I've laid out there, and they'll be very familiar to you because they are the kind of things we're getting bombarded with from the news media, social media all the time. So obviously the idea of economic growth, but a particular kind of growth, growth in GDP, which of course then leads to growth in material consumption with all the impacts that that has on the ecology of the planet. The idea of individualism and that we should be free from constraint, so that freedom is about freedom to act as we choose as individuals. The idea of competition and hierarchy, that our natural relationship is one of competition, and that almost a survival of the fittest idea. The idea that government should get out of the way, that we should make smaller government, that we should privatize, we should deregulate so that the market can get on with providing efficient alternatives. There's reductionist ideas in there, more coming from, I guess, a scientific paradigm, but the idea that we can break things down into smaller pieces to understand them. Private ownership of capital, really core idea of capitalism in general. And often underpinning a lot of this, and this is, I guess, a deeper narrative, more of a sort of, that's been around for hundreds of years, is this idea of separation, that humans are separate from nature, that we're separate from each other, and that as a result, because of our separateness from nature, that then justifies all sorts of exploitation of nature. So why do we want to talk about narratives and NENA? As George Monbiot said, only a story can replace a story. And so this powerful narrative of neoliberal capitalism is, if we want to move beyond it, we need to find new economic narratives. And I'll say plural narratives rather than what I've said on the slide of a new economic narrative, because maybe it's not just one narrative, but we certainly need stories that can replace the neoliberal capitalist narrative, that can challenge its authority, its power over people's lives. And if we agree that that's something that we need, then there's certain things that narratives need if they're going to be powerful, memorable, they're going to stick with people, they're going to drive change. So generally, narratives work best if they've got some sort of tangible setting. They're not sort of really abstract, but they are based in place. And we could think about what place makes sense. Do we want to have a story that's about Australia? Do we want to have a bigger story about our region? We want to have a smaller story that's about bioregions, perhaps? What sort of settings do we want to use to tell stories about what a wellbeing economy might look like? There's always a sequence of events in the narratives. The stories have a structure to them, a beginning, a middle, and end, some sort of movement, some sort of plot. And you could see that in the George Monbiot version of this, starting with a problem, moving to a response that leads to a happy place at the end. Sorry, there must be timings on my slides. Then there's characters, and those characters have some sort of agency. And if they can be characters that we relate to, that can help us to see how we can play a role in bringing forth a wellbeing economy, then that's going to be much more powerful. And narratives need some sort of world building. What's the new world going to look like that comes out of these stories and narratives? And the more tangible you can make that feel, the more you can give a sense of what it's going to feel like to live in the world that emerges from this narrative, the more powerful those narratives can be. So I don't need to really recap on the program for the week. Michelle's covered that pretty well. But just to point out that part of what we're doing this week is we want to build the capacity of people in NENA to work with narratives. And so we've got a few, as well as sort of talks like today, we've got workshop activities that are going to help you to notice narratives, to work with narratives, and to become better storytellers yourselves. We've got digital storytellers coming to run a workshop around that, particularly on Friday, and we're hoping that that might lead on to some additional work with that group about how to tell the stories of the NENA network and broader networks in a way that starts to weave them together into something more powerful for creating change. So people have already been introduced today. I just want to flag that after we've had these talks and we've had a little bit of time for questions and discussion, I'm hoping we'll be able to do a little activity about how can we sort of shift some of those ideas in the neoliberal capitalist narrative into positives, and how can we start to engage in dialogue that might move beyond those ideas and transform those ideas without totally jettisoning some of what might be valuable about them. So hopefully we'll get time to do that, and I will stop now and hand back to Michelle.
Thanks, Chris. I think I'm going to hand back to me, Michelle.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Chris. That was actually a brilliant overview of the importance of stories, but really connecting it to the economic issues we're challenging at the moment, or trying to challenge. But yes, over to you, Alana. We'd love for you to introduce yourself and to share some of your thoughts on the role of narratives in society. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Chris, I think you touched on some really potent concepts and principles that will guide the whole week unfurling. And I found myself getting a little bit nervous when you were talking about neoliberal capitalism. And I realized I've never actually said those words out loud together. And it actually moved me into that space of, you know, that competitiveness and that hierarchy that can come from that. And I thought, oh my gosh, I really, I got a new strength around wanting to do a narrative version of my acknowledgement to country. And when I do that, I invite all of you to think about the vibrations that we're going to collectively send to each other on the screen, but also to country and to all the humans and the more than human kin that we have that are between us. We're spread across this continent of Australia. So if you'd like to close your eyes, as we firstly draw in nourishment from around us, and we're going to acknowledge the country within our skin. And, you know, all of these stories that we experience, that we're a part of, come through this physical vessel that we have this responsibility to navigate through all these different triggers and events and beauty and messiness. So just checking in with self and how you're feeling from the top of your head, moving that little scan down through your body as you continue to draw in that nourishment, exhaling gratitude on the out breath and extending that scan down through your legs, down to your toes. And as that gently ascends through your body, makes its way back up, you lean more into that pattern of gentle and purposeful breath, inhaling nourishment, nourishing that country within, exhaling gratitude, just engaging that parasympathetic nervous system, the perfect space in which to rest and digest, to immerse, to navigate, to orient yourself. With your next breath in, we're going to give thanks, extend gratitude to the traditional custodians all across our continent who lived in harmony and reciprocity with our shared mother, Mother Earth, all these different language groups that had a very keen sense of what it meant to live a whole and balanced life. And we can be inspired by that legacy that we've inherited as contemporary custodians, by those traditional custodians, the way that they lived, the way that they continue to live, and the way that they will live into the future. Settling into that breath even deeper. I now invite you to acknowledge a collective vibration to that shared mother that we all have, Mother Earth. Just thinking about the lines of vibration that she was nurtured by prior to colonization. And by stepping into this space, we can pick up that weave. We all have unique potential, drawing in from traditional custodians, new and emerging technology to weave stories, new ways of knowing, being in the world. And so that final provocation is for you. I've been building up to that with this acknowledgement the whole way through. It may not be clear to you in this moment what your contribution may be to the story of this continent, to the bioregion that you live within, maybe to your family unit, maybe to your own personal health. But the provocation with all of this work is to look after self and to think about the ripples and echoes of energy that move between the stories, the nests that we are a part of, and how you will maintain balance and wholeness within that. Inhaling nourishment, exhaling gratitude, feeling the potency of all those ancestors that walk on our continent. Maybe not in a physical form, but their vibrations are layered in the soil, on the surface, in the air. And what might be your picking up and weaving a new future? So if you've closed your eyes, you might like to open them now and just raise your gaze. So as a regenerative practitioner, I understand stories as nests. So I was born and grew up on mainland Australia. So, I was geographically distanced in some ways from my Torres Strait Islander family. And I also have family in PNG and Ireland. And I know that most of us in modernity today have a very vibrant life tapestry. And I think my desire to live with more intention as a link in the chain of humanity has meant that I've gone back and connected more with my family stories, what drove them to do the things that they did, the actions that they took, the sacrifices that they may have made, the joys that they experienced. And it's added a depth and a meaning to my life. And this potential is something that I feel we all need to have a very intimate connection with to become effective storytellers. But as a regenerative practitioner, I understand stories as being the nests. And so, the first layer of that acknowledgement to country that I gave talked about what we have happening within our skin. And, I feel that somewhere within each and all of us, within our skin, there is a nest. Might be in our solar plexus. I feel it's probably in our torso somewhere. But that's the nest that we experience, that we release from, that we magnify from. That is our internal potential as that link in the chain of humanity. And that's why I say, it's always really important that we tend that internal nest. And so it's very different to the advertising messages that we might hear that want us to eat lots of comfort food and just live in that convenient, capitalist type of groove. It's not about the accumulation of assets. It's not about being comfortable all the time. It's about achieving balance and wholeness within the living system. And I think, that's what living systems are always striving for. And I see that. It really came home to me as a Waiapa practitioner, which has 14 elements that we reconnect people back to country with. And when I looked at the wind and the lightning elements with the movement sequence, it's lightning is energy trying to equalize in the sky. So, it really came to me that it's just that system trying to achieve balance. Wind happens because of, differences in air pressure, and it's the air pressure trying to equalize. And I haven't really come across a living system that doesn't want to achieve balance and wholeness. And so I think that modernity, advertising, sometimes academia can actually encourage us to be an external observer to those nested systems that we're a part of. And I think that that allows that separation that Chris was talking about earlier. It allows all sorts of travesties to take place. And I feel that, First Nations today, and definitely prior to colonization, very much saw themselves as a nested observer, part of the magnificence, the beauty, feeling that wonder and awe of what was going around, that very intimate connection with the seasons, seeing what the ants were doing, what plants were in flower, and really eating informed by the seasons. And, we've moved away from that in our pursuit of that 24/7 on-call type of existence that we seem to have come to through this neoliberal capitalism. So I think, any opportunity that you have to drop into being that nested observer is so important, not only for your well-being, but for the well-being of your family, for the well-being of your neighborhood, for the well-being of the other humans who see you as a role model, even if you don't see yourself as a role model. For our more than human kin. So, not only our animals and our plants, but the waterways that carry the vibration of humans, where, we're doing such horrendous things to our water. And yet, we're just part of the planet's hydrological feedback loops. We think that we're separate, but we're not. So I think that it's a very delicate dance that we have to become better at. And I sort of feel that being a storyteller is almost being a good mover and a shaker in terms of being a dancer of the patterns of life. And we know that, we want to continue evolving. We have a beautiful planet that we are lucky to call home that's been here for 4.5 billion years, and we were one of the last species to emerge on the planet. But we are causing such irreparable damage to her, to the point where, she might actually say, oh, there's no space for you here anymore. You're no longer a welcome guest. And we tend to think in lots of spaces and places that we should be trying to influence as much as we can. that we are the apex species, that we're at the top of the pyramid in some way, and it's such a nested existence that we've evolved to be a part of, and we're upsetting that natural balance and wholeness. So I could tell you a personal story of self, but I know that I've sort of can ramble on a little bit, so I've been reluctant to do that. But I just wanted to say that I feel, I spent 25 years in government, and I was really conditioned as a younger person to think that it was so important and powerful for me. Sorry, I'm just going to decline that call that came through. And so I know the security of a fortnightly paycheck when I was raising my children, but having that job within government also made me feel like it was a golden cage. It was something that occupied a lot of my brain space 24/7. And I didn't have the autonomy to direct my energy, my vibrations in places and spaces where I wanted to. So there is an element of being vulnerable and also stepping out of our cozy existences. And I feel, we should all encourage each other to take those steps when they present themselves, and to searchingly, and and I have two amazing young men who I've been lucky to birth onto this planet, and I sort of see that all the time as a parent. That process that we go through between nurturing, sometimes pushing, but allowing them to actually come into their own bigness and who they actually are in the world. And it's going to look different for all of us. And that's, very much from that nested space as well. So that intimate knowledge of self. We all have those moments in time when we can look, we can observe, we can influence. And sometimes when we can consider it to be sometimes like in the ocean, when we have all those waves that continually come in and crash on our heads, and we feel like, oh my gosh, there's a wave of neoliberal capitalism over there. There's a wave of the angry boss over here. There's an aging parent over here. There's my own physical health. There's a lot of things that we're all navigating and trying to, continually strive for that balance and wholeness. So I feel that, we should never be frightened when those waves are crashing in, to actually go deep in the surf and, going sideways sometimes, all these directions that are opposite to the economic curve of, from the bottom left up to the top right. And it's all being held by country, which I just think is so profound. So I want to leave it there, but I'm really happy to take any questions, because I really see myself as just sort of, growing with this whole process as well. And I'm offering myself to you on this day as a lifelong learner who just really is so grateful for the nested abundance that I find myself to be a part of. And it is a very powerful way in which to move forward in the world, which may not translate to the financial equity or the financial bank statements that, I know some people feel security from, but the relational equity and the vibrations that I can draw down from people, from place, all across the continent, just blows me away. It's a really, gives me a lot of strength and a lot of foresight, and it helps me with my vision and my clarity as well. And I suppose it's that, it's become very real. It's really allowed me to see what is important. And I know that when I take my last breath, I'm going to look back and think, my goodness, that's been a life well spent, which I, sometimes think, it's a financial term, and that's part of the conditioning. It's more like a life well savored.
And do you mean savored or saved as in pronouncing saved?
O-U-R, there's
Yes.
S-A-V, yes, savor. Not like save money.
Yeah,
More
not
like a
exhausted.
mouthful of the best you know, the last meal that you have that, anyway, whatever, you know what I mean?
I like that. No, I like that. You've drawn attention to a word that indicates a life kind of drawn out, exhausted and ended, as opposed to a life enriched and lived and savored, and then moving into the next phase of whatever happens next.
Whatever happens, yes.
Thank you, Alana. That was wonderful. And look, as someone who works in many different spaces and across different ideas, it's wonderful to hear Chris's introduction to what narratives are, and really thinking, particularly with my NENA hat on, you know, how do we play a part in shifting these discussions? And then moving into what you've shared with us, Alana, a much more personal way of connecting with the power of stories. And for me, I'm excited at the idea of all of us connecting with ourselves, as you say, and bringing that where it's suitable into the outer world, and helping that kind of flow between that cellular level of how do I be a human being in this society that is hoping to share more positive stories. So we're getting lovely comments in there in the chat. If anyone has any questions for Alana, please pop them in the chat. We can either have one or two now. We can certainly come back also at the end of our discussion. And Alana's sharing a link. Alana is a practitioner in a lot of beautiful processes, but also in the regenerative space. And Alana and I work together inside the Regenerative Songlines Australia network and many other places. And we'll be drawing Alana back into the NENA space whenever we can. So thank you so much, Alana. If questions pop up, at the moment, everyone's just saying a huge thank you. And someone's saying that was beautiful. Thank you here so much. All right. Thank you, Alana. Chris, would it be a good time to share the little talk that Katherine Trebeck pre-recorded? That would be great. Thank you very much. Alana, we'll bring you back into our little panel after this discussion.
All right. So Katherine Trebeck is, she's a political economist, writer and advocate for economic system change, and the co-founder of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, as well as WEALL Scotland. And she's recently returned to Australia after a long stint in Scotland and really wanted to be here today, but unfortunately is traveling to an event. And so we've got a pre-recorded presentation or talk from her, which I will share with you now.
Hi everyone, my name's Katherine Trebeck and I've just returned back to Australia, to my hometown of Canberra after 17 years living in Scotland, where I've done various pieces of work, all of them asking bigger questions about how we talk about the economy. So I'm really excited that you're having this series of dialogues this week, and I'm sorry to be having to do a pre-recording like this, but I really hope we can stay in touch, and I'm excited to hear what comes out of your deliberations. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and I'm really chuffed to see NENA leading the charge to set up a WEALL hub here in Australia. One of the things I want to flag to you that WEALL has been working on over the last few years is something called Stories for Life, which is a bunch of folk, largely UK based, looking at how we tell better stories about the economy. So jump on that website, storiesforlife.org, I think it is, and they were featured at Glastonbury just a couple of weeks ago. So that was quite exciting in terms of getting these dialogues and these discussions and these topics out to a much wider audience. And what I want to think about is why narratives matter. And of course they matter because they shape how we see, how we process in our heads, and how we seek to understand the world around us. And because of that, they shape how we think about change and how we go about trying to change that world. And so because of that, they influence things like the questions that we even dare to ask. They shape the agenda, what's on the table for discussion, let alone the change envisaged. Narratives also shape, forgive me for this term, but our cognitive bandwidth, you know, what we think about and how we think about it. And they also shape the permission that we give ourselves in terms of what's in our mind, how we ask questions about things like the economy, and how we act. So they're profoundly important. And I think it's really great that you're all coming together this week to think about how we better use
Has that stopped for everybody else? Or just for me?
Yep, stop for me too.
It's up for me too, Chris.
Okay.
We did have sound right up until just then.
Okay.
Perhaps you could stop sharing and then reshare.
Yeah, I'll try that.
And yes, I think we all saw the video as frozen, which is a bit odd, given we could hear.
Okay.
It's all good. We'll edit this bit out of the recording.
Might be a little bit too much for my little computer. Well, let me try again.
Yeah.
Looks like Georgia.
No, this isn't working for them. Dear me.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, folks, but it just won't work for me. It worked fine in practice.
That's okay, Chris. We did get the general vibe. What I can do, we might find a way to share the link with everyone who joined us today. And when we do the recording and upload it, we'll make sure that James has the original version so we can pop it in there appropriately. If you've got the link, is it a publicly accessible link?
I can certainly make it publicly accessible.
Why don't we jump into the exercise that you're going to run? Send me the link and I'll see if I can run it here later.
Yeah, the problem is everything at my end is currently locked. So my computer won't do anything else right now.
Okay, look, you know what? It's fine. We're flexible human beings. It was lovely to hear a little bit.
So if we could
Do we want to open up for the Q&A and you go in and out again, Chris? And that might help you.
Yeah, that's what I was
functionality.
So if I'll jump out and back in, and if you want to do Q&A until I get back.
Well, we might, yeah, if you jump out and jump back in, we'll wait for you to come back in. But certainly if there are any questions for Alana, folks, either raise your hand in the electronic form or wave or write your question down in the chat. Sorry about that little hiccup, folks, the joys of Zoom life. So Alana, in your kind of upbringing, what were the role of stories as you saw it as a kid? I mean, were you aware of differences in how, you know, your family would communicate or the types of things people did together compared to?
I think because I'm in my 50s, so just to sort of put a generational marker in place, I think the White Australia policy was still had its hold on all of us. And I think my mother, because my dad is white, and my mother, she was the one that had the darker skin. And yeah, she was a fluent speaker of Miriam, and she passed on maybe a handful of words to us. And I think that, it's important for everybody to sort of understand that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are all at different places in terms of their knowledge around this stuff, because, a lot of us are still going on the journey of rediscovering and reclaiming culture. And so I know there are some, like other Australians, that might know more than some of us. And it's a beautiful thing because that's how it stays alive. But I just feel there's a word of caution around how you might be with that knowledge that you have around other people who may have been stolen generation or may have had a whole range of different things that affect them being immersed in that. I'm part of there's a Woiwurrung language program, and that Brooke Wandon, she's been teaching at Hillsville Primary, and she's been doing it for about 6 years. So at the end of this year, there's going to be non-Aboriginal kids that are going into high school that know a lot more Woiwurrung than people like her dad, for example. And she said it's always been a bit of a tension within her. Like, you know, it's really important to give it away so that it stays alive. But, you know, we're having these 6 sessions. It's just a starter of Woiwurrung for Wurundjeri people. And, you know, we want to have that intergenerational transfer of knowledge. It's particularly looking at, you know, about a dozen young Wurundjeri people, but we've said, you know, we would love you to bring your parents, your uncles, your aunties, your grandparents to come to these sessions as well. And, you know, we'll make it a fun thing. And it's not about anyone being the expert or knowing stuff, but it's part of just, you know, extending that journey that we've had. And, you know, colonization and some of the impacts are, you know, still wear very heavily on Aboriginal people. And I've seen, you know, because I show a documentary on the colonisation of Gippsland, the Warrigal Creek Massacre documentary, and it wears heavily on other Australians as well. So, you know, it's not just a load that's being carried by Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. Non-Aboriginal Australians carry a load from colonisation as well. And I think, you know, while we're still sort of shackled by the neoliberal capitalism, and we don't sort of face the shared history that we have with, you know, braveness and compassion and empathy and love for each other. You know, we stay stuck there. And, you know, I was saying before when I spoke that, you know, living systems want balance and wholeness, and they want to continually evolve. And, you know, we tend to, you know, make some things stick, and it's, you know, can cause us to de-evolve as a species. And I think, you know, we're in this huge period of de-evolution when you look at us in a, you know, broader sense. But, you know, there's such amazing things that are happening as well. Like, I feel so hopeful and, you know, have so much, you know, joy about the future. I don't know if that answered your question, Michelle, but yeah.
It was a beautiful answer to some of it. Yes, no. And thank you so much, Alana, for reminding everyone that everyone's experiences are different. And in fact, my question was almost more about when we grow up as families, or as children in families, and then we become adults in families, it's even the stories inside those families, regardless of which cultural background or mix you might have. My father was raised by his, well, one of the people who raised him was his Irish grandmother, who had come to Australia from Ireland. And that deep social justice bent and that crazy sense of humor and all these different aspects, like, have infiltrated through to me as a, you know, as a person who's only visited Ireland once. But some of those cultural aspects of our stories really stick. And I'm really interested and I love how Chris framed it, you know, how do we build on the good things but shift some of the other things? We don't have to transplant everything that's new. We don't have to change all of the old things either. So we have to find that, as you say, balance between the stories and the things that matter, but really challenge the messaging that's coming through a society that can be very harsh, very consumerist, very competitive. So Chris, I note that you've shared the link for Katherine's talk. So thank you very much for that. So if anyone's missed it, if you go into the chat, you'll see the very last thing that was posted is Chris has put 2 notes. One is Katherine's video is here, and it's only about 7 minutes worth a look. Right, so there is a question here too from Andrew to both Chris and Alana. I'll try to read it. So you mentioned replacing stories as possibly necessary. Just questioning that narrative in the context of natural, regenerative, nested principles, and whether possibly being additive and integrative rather than replacing may be more inclusive. I guess the analogy might be, rather than pulling out the weeds, composting them, just conscious there's so much to learn from what we've already done and building on that. What are your thoughts? Chris, did you want to jump on that first?
Yes. Look, I agree. And in fact, that's what the activity that we're going to do shortly is all about. But it's funny how often you slip into language that doesn't quite have the nuance of how you think about these things. And so, I mean, George Monbiot's language is definitely, you need a new story to replace an old story. And so I kind of carried on that language a little bit, but I'm certainly more interested in how can we build on what's gone before, because that story did a lot of great things and it meets a lot of needs. And so, but it's also causing lots of problems, ecological devastation, human misery. So we want to find the good things in that story that we might carry on, but also build some new elements, maybe connect things in a different way, weave a new narrative that is not
I would totally agree with you, Chris, because I do a lot of stuff in the built environment, and they talk about embodied carbon of old buildings. It's not about going in and I think the really good architecture actually looks at what is there already and thinks, oh, how could we use this embodied carbon? Because everything that exists has come from somewhere, and it should be honoured in some way. And if it can be put into the compost as opposed to being obliterated, it seems like a much better thing. And I've put the link in the chat for the regenerative practitioner, and we have one of the resources and frameworks that we work with in there. It looks at the dichotomy of a lot of the things that happen in that neoliberal capitalistic world, where things are either good or bad, or they're bankrupt, or they're viable, or they're hot, or they're cold. And we often talk about we need to show up in the right space at the right time, hopefully, to be that healing third force of energy, because life doesn't exist in a dichotomy. It's not about yes or no, hot or cold. It's a spectrum, and it's not even so it really looks at that sort of thinking and being that third reconciling force. And I remember when I was doing this training, the regenerative practitioner, and I said, reconciliation for a lot of Aboriginal people in Australia is a bit of a moot point in some ways, because there was this idea that it's reconciling two things that were once together. And they sort of said, I know you've got to sort of, there is not this one-dimensional view of what reconciliation is. It's not necessarily bringing back two things that were once joined, because a lot of Aboriginal people, rightly argue that, there was never a cohesion at the beginning, at first contact, or and in lots of places ever more to this point. And so that, there was this real aversion to that word reconciliation, but it's actually about weaving, I think is probably a better word. Is that whole idea of weaving things to move away from that, dichotomy of viewpoints, which are very unhelpful, because I think they just lead to dead ends. They lead to people feeling fatigued. They lead to burnout. They lead to people stepping away when you become so hard and rigid and trying to maintain your own position. Whereas if you can actually exhale with gratitude into that space and weave something together, it can really evolve and move forward.
That's lovely, Alana. And Alana, were you sort of also responding to Simon's comment in the chat? Because he said, thanks, Alana. It seems like, I'm juggling the comments, jumping away like a living organism. Thanks, Alana. It seems like we get caught in binaries where the way we think about the past or the present or the future can be itself the product of a framing that might need to be questioned. And I think you've actually responded to that already.
Yeah, but it's the paradox. And I think, as Australians, we have to be so clever with feeling comfortable with paradox, because I just think about the fact that we're the driest continent on the surface, but we have the largest body of water underneath the surface of water. And so there's just so many paradoxes that are around us all the time. And modernity and advertising and all of these things are just trying to groom us to think that things are really simple and think linear, but it's not the way of life. It's more the way of multinationals and big purses somewhere that's a long way away that we never get to see or benefit from.
Thank you, Alana. Chris, do you have any thoughts, just final thoughts before we go to your exercise about these ideas of moving between concepts like past, present, future?
Just that one of the things that this makes me think about, and I find a real struggle in this work, is if we're talking about transforming narratives to find narratives that will support the emergence of a well-being economy, it's easy to think of trying to find the one narrative that will do that, because you've got this one narrative of neoliberal capitalism that seems so powerful, and So in trying to think about how to challenge that, you kind of, oh, we've got to find something equally powerful, and you can get into that binary thinking again of, all right, it's a competition between our new narrative and neoliberal capitalism. And I think you're falling into the trap of neoliberal capitalist thinking when you do that. And that what we're trying to bring to life is something quite different. And it's many narratives woven together. It's and it will have a different kind of power because of that. It's not that confrontational power. It's something that grows, and it's that much more in that idea of regeneration and sort of the relationships, rather than trying to set up
that one big theory.
Yeah, we don't want to compete on the same territory as neoliberal capitalism. We actually want to create a new kind of narrative.
And that, Chris,
we know how to do that yet.
No, but that's so important. And look, I'll be honest, as someone who's played a role in trying to build the New Economy Network as a platform of place to bring people together with diversity. You know, we've got this distributed governance structure, so different hubs can bring ideas to each other and go back out again, a kind of ebb and flow of ideas. And then you see the rise of certain concepts, and then you see the battle of ideas. People want their idea to be the framing. And I won't mention any of them because I don't want to offend anyone, but really there's been several kind of movements. There's new movements. And I think if we can, exactly as you've both said, accept this need for balance and to find, I think in the NENA platform, many stories that make up, you know, the patchwork quilt of our society and our life, and accepting and loving rich, diverse ways of thinking and seeing. I think that in itself is a story, you know, and I often talk about breaking down the concretization of nature and letting the life grow back through. And I think what colonial and the British Empire and so-called modernity, all of these things of the last 400 years and the last 300 in Australia, 250, has brought with it these set ideas, one legal system, one language, you know, one way of thinking about nature, one way of thinking about the economy. And I do think, if nothing else, what we're trying to do is break down that concretization of humanity and thinking, building back up from relationships and allowing diversity. And certainly in the work we do inside the Australian Earth Laws Alliance and Green Prints, Regen Songlines, it's all about helping people, at least here in Australia, acknowledge all these multiple places and the remarkable, if you start from country, you know, even in Western science, there are 89 bioregions and 450 sub-regions and blah, 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 many ecosystems. Even in Western science, it sees diversity. So let's think about that as a lovely message that's come out of today, I think. And I certainly love hearing this. It's reinforced what we've been battling with for years. Do we grab one framing and hang on to it? Or do we just go, what the hell, let's keep building all these stories of building the cool stuff and connecting to place, connect to each other. It's a very interesting time to be contemplating these issues. But that's enough from me and my ramble, but I thought it was important to reflect back on what we've been literally struggling with inside NENA. You know, how do we build a platform of folks coming together if we want lots of different conversations and we want, thank you, Sarah. Sarah's just put, love your rambles. Thank you. I feel inspired to continue them into the future. But yeah, how do we do this? And how do we together play a positive role in inviting more people into these conversations? So, but Chris, I think we've had a lovely initial Q&A. Might hand over because I'm really keen to do whatever the exercise is that you've dreamt up for us. And then time permitting, we'll see how we go with the final Q&A or any final comments. So over to you, Chris.
Can you give me screen sharing back because I dropped out? And
yes, I will. All yours, my dear.
Thank you. Alrighty, so we've been talking about this, this weaving, this trying to build on what comes before, and that's the kind of thing I'd like to think about in this activity. So I put up before this these elements of the neoliberal capitalist narrative, and the activity here is about how could we evolve these ideas into things that we would see as positives for a new economic narrative. Is there, for example, you might look at these and say, can we see a deeper human need that's being met by that idea that we could meet in a different way? Or is the idea itself not necessarily bad, but it's just the way that it's being used, and we could think of a different way to emphasize that idea. So to give you an example, if we think about the first one of growth in GDP, we can see that endless economic growth is a problem right now because we're measuring economic activity as GDP, and that leaves out lots of important things and counts things that we don't actually want. And so the kind of growth that we're measuring is growth in material consumption and growth in ecological impacts. But there's nothing necessarily wrong with growth if we're growing the right things. Endless growth in planetary health, in well-being and potential, that would be a great thing. So that perhaps that's one of the easier ideas here to actually flip into a positive, evolve into a positive, is to, as has been talked about a lot, think about different ways of measuring economic activity, of measuring human well-being, having a different goal for the growth that we're pursuing. Now that not everyone would agree with that. The degrowth ideas might say that we should be avoiding talking about growth at all, but there's something I think to explore here. So that's just one example, and the activity is really about, I'm going to share a link to a Google Doc, and we'll go into small groups. We're going to have to do it pretty quickly because we're a bit short of time, but in your little group of 3 people, say, have a look at one of these ideas and see if you can come up with some way that you could evolve that into something more positive for a future well-being economic narrative. So I'm just going to, and you'll be able to see these ideas are in the Google Doc, so you'll be able to refer to them. So I've just put the document link there. Once you go in there, you'll see it's just a simple Google document, and if you scroll through it, you'll see the different ideas that were on that slide. And I've filled out that one example idea for under growth, that there's nothing inherently bad about growth, it's just we're measuring the wrong things. So in your group, you're not going to have time to go through all of them, but pick one to have a look at and see if you can work out a way to evolve that idea into something more positive. We're only going to do it for about 5 minutes, so we come back and have some time to wrap up. So
well, I was also going to say, Chris, that you know, if you want 5 to 8 minutes, we can go up 5 minutes over time with our session today. It's due to finish at 1:30, but I'm sure if folks have to leave, they will. And if you want to stay on, that's okay. Now, Chris, I can do breakout groups. How many folks? Do you reckon 3 or 4 in a group so that everyone has a chance?
I get three or four in each group. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to set them up right now. So folks, if you're new to using Google Docs, you just click on the link and you should be able to see the same document that everyone else has. We do hope, if you don't want to go in, totally fine. You're very welcome to come back in and be part of the wrap up at the end.
And
I think people are going into groups now. Yeah, it's working. Huzzah. Just going to resume our recording. Thanks everyone for going into those discussion groups. It was a little speedy. Our beautiful colleague, Alana Marsh, has had to rush to another event and said to say thank you so much for having her as part of this. And please do check the chat. She's put in links there to her practice, to her work. And if anyone is chasing her and can't find her, send us an email at NENA and we'll connect you. I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. So Chris, did you want to peruse the Google Doc and perhaps share a few thoughts on what folks have been writing in terms of how do we connect to and build on and perhaps counter some of those other ideas? And yeah, look, we'll be wrapping up in, let's say, 4 minutes. We're not going to go too much over time, folks.
Yeah, well, thank you. Am I off mute? Yes. Thank you for all the wonderful ideas in there that you had to generate super quickly. If you think of others, then this Google Doc will stay open. We may continue to use it through the other sessions as well and just add some more headings and structure and things to it. Yeah, I mean, I loved there's a lot under the growth in GDP one, and I love just things that were jumping out at me were some of the nice words there: harmony, goodwill, balance, security being thought of in different ways, health. So yeah, I think lots of great stuff there. Our group was talking about the small government, and we, you know, that's often driven by trying to make government more efficient by moving towards private sector, but we were thinking of it more in terms of getting government closer to the people, and so, you know, local governance and nested governance, and making the sort of top level hierarchical government smaller. So I think there's a way to flip that one. I think some of the stuff under competition jumped out at me as well, about the idea that you can turn things into a race and make them competitive, but in perhaps a fun way. So climate action being a race, and the UN I've seen has done the Race to Zero initiative. So trying to, I guess it's about making that a healthy competition and making sure the goals of that competition are compatible with the kind of narrative that we're trying to create. And then I noticed there was a lot under separation as well, and thinking about, you know, some ideas in there that moving from loneliness to aloneness. So it was an interesting one. Celebrating diversity, recognizing boundaries. So, you know, probably it'd be great to dig into some of those a little bit more, and think about how we can draw out the positive elements of, yeah, how we're both individuals and part of systems. We're all nested. So at times we will be separated, and at times we'll be together, and that recognizing that dual movement is quite important. So those are a few things that jumped out at me, but I'll try and whip that into something neater and send it around later.
That would be great, Chris. Thank you. I was on mute. And we might even put some summary notes when we put the recordings up for each day. We might even share some of the summary notes if they're ready in time, or, you know, respectable for others to digest. Someone commented that some of the links, or that the chat has disappeared when they've come back from the breakout. So what I'm doing is copying in the link for Katherine's video, Alana Marsh's link that she shared about her own work, and also the Google Doc, because that Google Doc is not going to actually just disappear today. We'll leave that up all week, and we might even just share it at every session. And your ideas are going to be kind of examined and processed by Chris, myself, and others in the NENA Hub, and will be integrated into the ongoing work we're doing, scratching our heads trying to work out how we build all this stuff and open it all up to everybody. There is a couple of final questions here, but it is 1:32. There was Phoebe. Oh, Phoebe mentioned some work by Vandana Shiva, and also plural economics.
While you're looking at that, Michelle, can I just do a plug for tomorrow's session?
Please.
Which is looking at how to communicate an inspiring vision for the future of our economic system. And we've got very lucky to have Alana Siegfried, who I quoted in my slides earlier, joining us. She's going to talk to us about her 10 new myths for humanity, which some of them are also quite old myths, but some really has tried to distill what might be the ideas that could go in, that we want to build into this narrative that we're weaving together. And she's also a slam poet and is going to perform one of her poems for us, which will be great. So that's kind of the first half of the session. Then we'll be moving into a second half with Caress Cranwell and Sophia Van Ruth from Wicked Elephants, who are going to take us through an activity around the power of personal storytelling. And I think that's going to be a really useful activity for people to get better at storytelling themselves. So really hope you can make it. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I was just reading through the comments. Phoebe's comment was, Where's the sort of the funding to support the livelihoods of folks trying to build new economies? As someone who's volunteered for 6 years, 3 days a week or 5 days a week to build NENA, yeah, good question. But in the meantime, we just have to get on with it, and we do it all around the edges of everything else, and connect and connect and connect and connect, because there's so many people out there. But yeah, if anyone finds a magic bullet and funding, gosh, NENA would love it. I'd love to build the next generation of young'uns to handle and to build, so that I can float off back to my earth-centered AELA work. But it's not about that. It's about the stories, and I'm excited about this week. I can't thank you all enough for being here with us in this first leg of our journey. And a huge thank you to Alana, Marsh, Riedy, and Katherine Trebeck. And the recording of today's chat will be up within a few days. Don't forget to keep an eye on the NENA website. And can I please suggest, if you are not a NENA member and you love what we do, membership is relatively cheap. That money literally goes directly to supporting the costs of all of our work. And down the track, as we run bigger events, we'll be able to pay young'uns to come and do this work, which would be lovely. But go forth, tell good stories about care, compassion, and bumblebees. And we'll see you tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel, I think. Thank you so much, Chris. And we'll see you all soon, lovelies.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Chris. Thanks, everyone.